Hi, I get emails on dieseltechron.com where people are asking me different questions about the 6.0, and most of them seem to be around crank nose starts or hard starting issues. So I want to try to cover it, especially covering the high pressure oil pump system, because that seems to be the area where people have the most questions. So hopefully I can do this here and get it so that we can all learn from something from this. What I want to go over, you have the 0304 style, which has this pump here, this round, most people just refer to it as the round pump. This is the earlier one. Then 05 and up, you have the cast iron pump here, which is the replacement one. So pretty much 05, 6, and 7, you'll see this one. The way I like to look at the system is, anytime this pump is turning, it's creating 3,000 pounds of pressure. The engine needs 500 psi to run, to idle, and then as it's driving down the road, you'll have 2,000 to 3,000 plus. You have an injection pressure sensor, which on the 03 it's located in the housing back here, and after 04 it's located up here on the oil rail, and it's telling how much oil pressure is going through the system. So you have this as your monitor, and you have your pump that's always creating 3,000 pounds of pressure, and you have an IPR or injection pressure regulator that will be distributing or controlling the fuel amount by the input of what the ICP wants. Remember, 500 psi at an idle, then depending on the load, up over 3,000 psi. The IPR, when it's at 15%, that's more or less just opened and it's dumping the waste oil back into the crankcase. When it's at command at 85%, then it's fully closed because it can't achieve the desired. So we want to see it running, never hitting 15 or 85%, because that means that it's either thinks it has too much pressure, and if it's ever at 15%, you have a bad ICP sensor. If it's at 85%, you either have not enough oil getting into the system, you have a restriction from a contamination to the screen, or you have a leak somewhere. By far the most common is a leak. So getting back to the pump, and also what I want to go by is trucks that's not been touched. If they've been touched and worked on, you've got to start doing a whole bunch of different testing. I'm just going off of what's mostly common with them. If you have the 03, 04, the round pump style, then you can have a weak pump, you can have a bad pump. That's fairly common. We see that with these pumps going bad. We'll see them only idle, performance issues, wanting to hit 85% with no leak from a bad pump on the 03, 04 style. If you have the 05 and up style, I've never seen these pumps get weak. These pumps are, and I've only ever had 2 bad ones ever on these things. So most likely if you're hitting 85% on one of these or a no start, the pump's okay, you have a leak, which we'll cover here in a second, go over and show different ways of testing it. So just to try to tell you what's going on, we try to look at the pump as it's always creating 3,000 pounds of pressure. So it's turning, when you're turning the motor over, the gear off the crank is turning your pump, it's creating 3,000 pounds of pressure. The ICP sensor, it's over here, it's trying to tell it, okay, I want 500 psi to idle. The pump's on the 03, it's going through here, it's going through the branch tube and up to the fuel rails, the oil rails up here, and getting down to the injectors. As long as we don't have a leak, everything's good. On the 03, what I normally see, I'll see these bolts stripped and this tube come loose and the O-ring be bad. Or I'll see people out of the kit, they'll come with this yellow gasket, the yellow seal, and this goes in the bottom of the block. If you use it up here on the top of the tube, I'll see them blown out. So make sure that the yellow one's located down here, and that's all good. Other than that, on the 03s, never see leaks at the injectors unless they've been touched or aftermarket. Usually the factory injectors don't leak. And also, if they've not been touched or apart, say in the last 2,000 miles, I don't even suspect the injectors. If I get a crank nose start, low injection pressure on an 03, 04, go right after the pump. If it is, if your pump's new and you're not sure, or if it's been touched, then you have to start doing leak tests. I'm going to cover on the end of this video, or after this introduction here, I'll show a few tests where we're doing it. What I'm starting to use now, and I like it a whole lot better, is we use this setup here. I get this from Accurate Diesel. We'll take the IPR valve out. We'll take the IPR valve out of the socket, and we'll put this way here. We just take shop air and inject it right in through the IPR. Doing it this way, we don't have any leakage, we don't have any issues. It'll pressurize both sides and do pretty good. So, and also I show that here down in the video in a few seconds. But basically what's going on, the pump's turning, pump's creating, as soon as it sees 500 psi, then it sends a signal to the PCM here The powertrain control module, once it knows the cam and crankshaft synchronization, it knows the position of it, then it'll start sending the signal to the FICM here to start running the injectors. Now the best way to look at a FICM is a distributor. A FICM will just take and turn on the injectors as needed. That's what all these wires to the injectors, there's a little spool valve inside here. There's a little, more or less like a gate inside there that allow the oil to enter in and push the fuel into the engine. And your FICM is nothing more than a distributor. We got to have the proper voltage above 45. Ideal is 48. So once the PCM knows the cam and crank position, it'll start telling the FICM which injector to fire, and it, just like as a distributor will send spark to it, the FICM will send a pulse here, move the valve inside here for a second. The high pressure oil that's inside here, that's created from the pump, will all of a sudden energize. Your fuel's all around this cavity right here. Your oil pressure will come here, push down the intensifier piston, the part inside the injector, and spray fuel into the engine, and you have combustion, you have fire. So that's more or less what we're doing with the system here with it. So some of the common problems, what I want to see, again, the 03 we covered, they're pretty good. You either have a bad pump or you have the tube bad. Also, when you do the pump on the 03, I do want to suggest that you do this tube, because this does have the snap ring connector on here, and they do fail. So always do on the 03, do the pump and the connector, the pump and the tube at the same time with it, and make sure you use the yellow one at the bottom. Now going after the 05 style, because this is by far the most common we're going to have. The 05 pump here is the most common failures are, this is the STC fitting. They call it STC for snap to connect. And the reason being is that we have a fitting here that snaps together. There's a snap ring inside here. This is the normal fitting that sits on top of the branch tube. It sits there. This goes on the back of the pump, and it just snaps together and it connects. But you just have a spring inside there, and eventually after having 3,000 pounds of pressure, it'll separate and blow apart, and that's where we have a failure here. This is the most common by far with the 05 and up. Or we have what we call dummy plugs. These are the standpipes. You have the pump, again, the pump's creating the pressure. Pump's creating the pressure, the 3,000 pounds. It's creating it, it's going through the branch tube, feeding the heads. Going up through the heads, we have the oil rail up here that's feeding the injectors, all the injectors on top of here. And this is the same on either side. So if it's on the passenger side, it's like this. If it's on the driver's side, it's back here. That leaves one of these passages. Again, when it's over here, we have the standpipe going up over here. When it's over here on this side, we have the standpipe going to the back one. So what we call or refer to as dummy plugs are these that caps off the one that we're not using. So what we see a lot of is the older style with a 10mm head, the seals will fail on them. Then what they've done, they replaced them with a 12mm with the reinforcement side here, and these don't fail. So almost always on an 05 and up, if you go in and do the STC fitting, the snap to connect fitting, along, and you put in this one that locks down, you won't have a failure again. If you do the proper torque on it, which I show in different videos, and you do the dummy plugs, you do that, you won't have an issue. What I do see a lot of, or I'm getting a lot of emails, honestly probably every half hour I'm getting an email, somebody asking me, I've never seen these nipples leak. And same way with factory injectors. I never see factory injectors leak unless it's an issue during installation. If you go and you get the tool, you take these apart, you put O-rings in here, in my opinion, you're messing it up. Because by far, the people that's calling me up or texting me or emailing me telling me that they got a leak, no start hot, or it ran good for a few thousand miles, they always tell me, yeah, I resealed everything. Okay, that's where we have to start again. If these have been touched, they probably are going to start to leak. If they were not touched, they're most likely they're not leaking. I've never had one of these leak, one of these nipples leak that were not touched. And they will all move. This is normal. They all do that. So what happens is, if during installation, when you're doing your injectors, if you push it down straight onto the injectors, you'll never have a problem. If you install it like this and you pinch the edge of your injectors, yes, you will end up having an issue. So when you go back together, make sure you install it straight and you won't have a problem with it. Same way too, the aftermarket injectors, it's not the injectors that give people problems, it's the quality of the seals that I see on every rebuild. Like still to this day, it's March 2015, still to this day I have not found an aftermarket injector that works good on a 6.0. And it's not that they're doing a bad job, I have never seen a seal yet in here that will last. I'll get some that I'll replace 8 injectors, end up doing 3 of them over again within a month or 2. And it doesn't matter what brand it is. Don't feel like being sued, so I'm not going to say any brands. But it doesn't matter what brand it is. It could be the best one out there that has the best reputation or that sells by far the most. I still get those all the time. I get them leaking. If a customer comes in with aftermarket injectors, I look them in the eye and I tell them I'll guarantee labor, I will not guarantee the tow, and I will not help. When you come back, you're paying again. You're paying labor, because almost every aftermarket injector on a 6.0 ends up giving me trouble. So not bad mouthing, I'm just trying to state a fact, just because I get all these emails, I get all the questions, and it is what I see. So now a couple things I want to point out. So if you have your pump, everything seems to be working good. You have so you have a crank nose start. You check, you look for FICM sync. You have FICM sync. You have FICM voltage above 45. You have your ICP pressure. It's very important when your ICP pressure, if you're looking only monitoring pressure, that could be what they call inferred. If you ever lose the voltage or the connection to your ICP sensor, it'll give you a false reading. It'll run off desired trying to run the vehicle. So if you have a bad signal, or if you're not sure and everything seems to be right, what we want to do is verify ICP voltage, because it'll never fake the voltage to the ICP sensor. And you have a couple ways of doing that. One, you can get these connectors from Diesel Truck Parts Direct. He has these different connectors where you can go in line. I got a video testing the ICP sensor voltage that explains each one and shows what to do. You can put these in series and then just use your volt ohm meter and go with it, and you can check it that way and verify that you have voltage, because voltage will never be fake. Voltage will never be improvised and made up. Voltage will be what it is. So if you ever see 0 voltage, you have a problem between the signal or the wiring. So one other pointer that I can give you guys here, if you want to take the PCM completely out of the loop, because what it'll do is it'll eliminate the PCM control and eliminate the wiring to the IPR. So you have your IPR valve. Well, a couple other questions I want to cover while I'm talking about the IPR valve. People ask me, if you energize it, if you put 12 volts to it, power and ground, what happens? All it does, it locks it down inside there. Energize this. There's more or less, if you just look at it as there's a spring in here and there's a seat, it's trying to stop the oil pressure from bypassing from here down these little holes back into the crankcase. So when you apply voltage to it, or when the PCM's doing it, it's just changing the amount of on time or how much voltage can bypass through here. When you do 12 volts, you're locking this down, which is taking the spring pressure, and the spring pressure is about 200 psi. So it's taking the spring pressure and it's locking this down. So now all the oil pressure that's coming through here has to be directed through the branch tube up to the oil rails down to the injectors. That's 85%. But if we suspect we might have a bad PCM or bad wiring, what you can do is you can take one of these connectors. This is actually one here. Show it right here. You can get these, either same thing, Diesel Truck Parts Direct. You can get a connector here, and you can make one up here just with some alligator clips, or you can take one from a 7.3. If you guys work on a lot of them, you have a 7.3 injector wire loom. It's the same one. It's the same one for your turbo actuator up here, same one for your IPR valve on the 7.3 or the 6.0 or the 7.3 injectors, all the same connector. So now you just make yourself a tool here. You can take it, plug it in, plug this into your battery. Leaving it plugged in for a minute or so is not going to hurt it. Then you've eliminated your PCM and your wiring out of it. Now what you've done, you can still use your cranking and monitoring your video, monitoring your sensors here and your ICP, because with this locked down, you should crank it and instantly start to see 3,000 pounds of pressure, because as soon as the pump starts turning, with this locked down, it should direct all the oil through here into the oil rails, and the pressure sensor should show that you're getting about 3,000 pounds of pressure with this locked down. If that's the case, then you want to be looking at your PCM or your wiring to it. If not, and you still have issues, you want to be going after either ICP voltage or be looking for a leak. So now what I want to cover is the leaks. And again, just remember, 03, 04, bad pump, or you might have a problem with the coupler tube that's on top, or that's normally what you see, as long as the injectors and everything else is stopped. If you have the 05 and up, again, 90% of them are going to be the STC fitting and the dummy plugs. So if you have a leak, you have a couple different options. As you can see, this is a brand new set that I probably got in 03, maybe 05, I'm not sure when I got it. Don't even use it because it's not that handy. What I like to do is two different ways. One, by far, would take it, unplug the IPR, take the IPR out of there, take this, screw it in, and once we have this in, we can open the valve, we'll turn the air on here, open the valve up, and start injecting air, and now we have air pressurizing the whole system, and this will find leaks. Especially with this system, it works pretty good, and you can find the leaks with this. AccurateDiesel.com, that's where you get those. If you already have these work fine too. It's just that these aren't as pronounced, which I'll show here at the end of the video. And these also, with injecting it this way, you inject it once and it's good. If you do it on these, what you have to do, you take the ICP sensor out, and this being your passenger side, you can inject air in here. When you inject air in here, what you're doing is you're energizing this whole system, and it's going to go through here, it's going to get on top of the injectors, and check this out, and it'll be going through and coming back up to the pump. A little bit does seep by and goes into the driver's side with the IPR. But again, remember, this is holding back 200 pounds of pressure, and it can't hold back air. Air will seep by, but to do a proper test, you have to inject this side, then put the ICP sensor back in, take off this valve cover, and inject that side when you're doing it this way. You can also take off this plug here, 6mm Allen, and inject it in up here. You don't really need to do that. You'll almost always find it by injecting this side or this side with this. Now, a couple things I want to cover. If you're doing it this way with the air hose and this adapter, you will have a leak through the front of the pump or the back of the pump, however you want to look at it, right here. That's normal, that's typical. That's your dump valve. That's when the IPR is discharging. It's going back through here. So you will have some leakage through here. That just happens. You get it from, again, the same amount of air that's leaking through here. If you do it here with this setup, it blocks it off, and you've got 100% of your air pressure going back through the system, and that's why that way will show leaks a whole lot better, or smaller leaks, it'll show up a whole lot more with this. So you have that with this air leak here, or you have this is for your 03 style, 03, early 04, because it just has a single rail on top of the injectors. We don't have the ICP sensor located in up here, so we don't use a larger one. We use a smaller one, which is the same as this right here, this fitting right here. On the 03, we take the valve covers off. We'll take that off, we'll screw this in there, and then we can pressurize or air leak each side of them if you're using this. Or again, if you just buy this, you don't have to. So that pretty much will cover as far as what we're looking for with the leaks on the different system, what's going on, what the ICP is looking for. Because again, the strategy is pump gets out there, starts cranking, it knows crank position, knows cam position, it'll synchronize, it'll set it up, so it says, hey, just start turning the injectors on. PCM sends a signal to the FICM, the FICM can then start turning on each injector just like a distributor would, and then it'll start spraying the fuel into the engine as it's rotating, and it should light. So when it's not going, you got to either see, do I not have FICM sync, do I not have FICM voltage, do I not have ICP voltage? Because remember, ICP pressure you can't trust unless you see voltage, and voltage should be about 1/4 volt key on, engine off. So you have ICP voltage, you have ICP pressure, you can trust it. But if your IPR is commanded to 85, it's because it's either that the pump was weak on the 03, 04 style, the pump was weak, it couldn't achieve the desired amount of pressure, or on the 05 and up, almost always a leak. And the leaks, either STC fitting or dummy plugs, by far the most common. Unless it's been touched, then you want to start air leaking it to look for the injectors. So on the video here, I'll show a couple different tests using the one from Accurate Diesel, showing that because I already have the videos out showing the other ones. One thing that's pretty handy about doing it with this new tool, pulling your IPR valve out, you may find your screen broke like this. And that way you can also air leak it, but you can find your problem too just by starting your diagnosis. So I'll show you how to clean this one and make sure that you have all the particles out of it. You can always inspect the O-rings. The kit does come with new O-rings. But what I do, you can see down inside there, you can see part of the old screen. So what I do is I just take a 6mm bolt, stick it here, push down on the plunger, because normally the plunger with spring pressure is seated right there. And on the back side, I'll spray in here. There's still a little piece inside there. So I'm going to try to work and get that piece out over here. It's on this side. And that's also the purpose of having a rag down so I can see when I get it. Okay, now it looks pretty clean. Soft. Just take the valve and push it down there. Make sure it's not broke. You can reinstall it and check it out. Pointer. This is the one that we just cleaned the valve out and we have it back in there. Now before I put the ficum and everything else in there, what I'll do is go over to the scanner. We have the ICP reading, IPR. We want to see how high our injection pressure gets now. So we want to watch the pressure up there on top. So we'll crank it. Slowly building. Remember, 500 psi just to start. Building. Okay, there we go. We have over 2,000 psi. It needs to purge all the air out of there. But now this one will start, or at least it's not going to not start because of an ICP or IPR problem. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one rest of the way back together and drive it. Also, if you do have damage to that screen, you want to make sure, check for contamination. The screens do fail from fatigue, just sitting there trying to hold back 3,000 pounds of pressure all the time. That's why they were redesigned with the braces, those plastic piece that you see up there up front of the new design. But they do fail from time to time, but every now and then you may have something else. So, you know, make sure that you check the oil's been changed lately and it's done properly. And if you have an uneven crank, you may have lost the lifter and have other issues. But those normally wipe out the base oil pressure, the front cover and all that, which I show in another video. This one I'm going to pull the valve covers and do the dummy plugs and also the coupler. But what I want to show is if you want to try to find the leak first, what you can do is remove your air filter, the oil cap. We remove the IPR valve and put the tool in there. So I'm going to inject shop air in it. And it'll take a minute or two, maybe even longer. This one's pretty bad. As you can hear, it's coming out of this side, so I have a leak here. What's good about doing it this way through the IPR, you have them all done. You don't have to sit there and try to isolate one side or the other. Also on small leaks, you may want to try to get the engine as hot as you can possibly do it safely to help you out. Because some of them do show up better when they're hot. Or if you can't get it to show up at all and it's a no start and you're in a cold climate, plug the block heater in for a day or more until it can get as hot as it can. I'm going to go ahead and pull this one apart and we'll look at this closer with the valve covers and the coupler off. Cover off and both valve covers off. If it's an 05 and up, you can still pressurize the system and check the pump with the cover off. If it's an 03, 04, usually they don't leak anyways, but you can't those you can't pressurize with a high pressure oil pump cover off because it's part of the way the oil follows and is fed through. So anyhow, this one does have the old spring snap to connect, the STC fitting on the back of on the side of the pump there. and it still has the old 10mm dummy plugs in here. Now with the, I'm going to go ahead and turn the air on. And you can see, actually I can hear both sides leaking with this, but this one's pretty big. I'm going to pull the coupler, the dummy plugs off and check it. And also check over here and see what we have. See it down here where it's completely worn through, and then same thing over here. You see where it's all worn. I'm going to go ahead and put the new dummy plugs in and turn the air back on. Okay, all I've done on it so far, I've got the valve open. All I've done is the two dummy plugs on both sides. It's usually what it is. Standpipes are extremely rare to fail. It's possible, but extremely rare. One last helpful safety tip. If you don't find a leak, or once you've confirmed your leak is fixed, do not just unplug the hose, because you do have this pressurized just like a balloon. Even though it's metal and it's not expanded, it's still pressurized. And if you had to get it hot, you don't want hot oil or anything else coming out. So make sure you shut it off. Anytime you have a valve sideways, that's off. Whenever they're straight in line, they're on. Then shut it off for a second, let it bleed down, then you can unplug it. Oil pump all exposed. Let's go ahead and turn the air on now. I don't hear anything at the dummy plug because that the leak is too large for the pump cover. I'm going to replace these with the old 10mm style and update them with the 12. Let's go ahead and get this updated, get the pump apart. If you have any questions on that, I do have other videos showing how to remove the pump from the cover, how to do it easily. Here's the same truck using the different style connector here through the ICP sensor. Get the same result, except for I don't think it's as pronounced with this style sensor or with this style connector, but it's still the same thing. The same SPC fitting, same results. Just wanted to show the difference because I know that we use both out there and want to compare them. Point out, if you're doing it this way, you would want to check both sides if you're looking for a leak. And again, it's most likely a coupler or the dummy plugs that's leaking, as long as it has not been worked on, modified, or have aftermarket injectors. Usually you go after those three, you're good. And also people are asking me all the time, do they have to do anything with the IPR valve? If you leave the IPR valve unplugged, some pressure will leak by and pressurize the driver's side, but it's minimal. When you're doing a thorough test, same thing. It's the same oil rail. That's why they call them dummy plugs, because the front side becomes the back side when you switch them over. But just take off this cap back here if you have to screw it in that way, or if you get the other one from Accurate Diesel, it'll test everything all at once. Another helpful hint, that coupler may come apart when they leak this bad, or even if they don't leak this bad, they may come apart, so be aware of that. I always make sure the coupler won't fall down inside, but the bolts will, so I remove the bolts and I make sure not to drop any, because if you drop them, you have to find them. Otherwise you may damage the cam gears, crank gears, who knows, it can even fall on top of the cam depending on where it falls. So grab the bolts now and be careful taking them out, and be careful of the coupler when you lift the pump up. Okay, a few other tips. Once it's broke, or the couplers come apart like this, and it's hit the back of the rear cover right here, you can see the indentation. That's not normal. That's from the when the coupler blew apart.
You want to check really good right here for cracks. Make sure it's not cracked. And also, technically, this is your branch tube. It's bad. It's should be replaced. I've had very good luck with just bending them back. Do not pry against the cover. If you pry against the cover, it will break. Stick something down inside here. I'm using a punch, and then you want to just pull it back. Again, now technically the cover is already bad, so if it does end up breaking, we're not the cover. The branch tube's already bad. So if it ends up breaking, it's not that we broke it. It's that it's already bent and bad. So I'll pull on it a few times. And what I'll do is I'll put my pump on now and see if that's tweaked enough. We'll check it a few times. And also, since once you've done that, you want to make sure the tube's not broke, that we'll pressurize it again. So I'm going to go ahead and put the coupler together and check, test fit this. Go ahead and do a test fit and see how it does. The only other thing I can say back here, make sure that all your holes are blown out and that they're clear, especially the ones that are blind holes that will hold fluid in them, because if you get a false torque on there, you will lose the seal, especially back here on the branch tube. This tube's known to fail on them. And I get guys calling me up, telling them or emailing me saying that they've already done the coupler and it can't be that. But once I get it and I tear it apart, I'll see that O-ring fail back there, just because the bolt holes were full of fluid and they didn't torque it right. So make sure that all your bolt holes are blown out before you tighten the pump down. Okay, what we're looking for is for these blocks back there, the coupler and the branch tube, just looking at them as blocks, we want them to line up. So pretty much do a test fit, see how it does, and if you have to, pull it back off, tweak it a little more and get it to line up right before you try to tighten it down. I also get people asking me, does the pump have to be timed or anything else? No, the pump just bolts on, it just turns and creates the pressure, so no timing of the pump necessary. If that was leaking from the dummy plugs, it's always a good idea to do the dummy plugs with the updated design. Again, here I have a 2003 that somebody else has been working on. It's got about 300 psi of pressure. It's all it builds up to. I always check the IPR first, but this one has a new IPR, so I'm gonna have to go deeper. And once somebody's been working on them, you have to go and pressure test it and check it all out. If you have the 2003, early 04, made before September of 2003, you're going to have this crossover tube there in back of the intake. When you have this, there's no way to get the high pressure pump out without removing the turbo and the intake manifold. All the other ones, like an 04, 05 and up, you can get that high pressure pump cover off without removing the intake. But this one, there's no getting around it. I'm going to go ahead and inject this one here through the IPR hole there. Turn the air on and let's listen for a leak. Let it go here for a minute. I don't really expect one, because the valve covers don't look like they've been off. Normally, if nobody's messing with it and the injectors are stock, as a norm, they don't leak. Of course, it can happen. It's just rare that they do. And the same thing here. I know I keep saying this, but I get emails all the time, people asking me, 03, 04, usually a high pressure pump, 05 and up, almost never a pump. The pumps are extremely rare on 05 and up. So I'm not hearing a leak on it. If you're not sure, or if somebody has messed with it, you would want to pull the valve covers and check it. Make sure everything's good there. But this one I'm going to go ahead and pull the high pressure pump cover off and inspect it. You're pressurizing a system. So especially if it had a leak, you want to be careful, just don't unplug your air hose. So just as a safety measure, shut it off first. And then we're going to disconnect the air hose, and I'll slowly open this up with a rag over the end and slowly release the pressure. Even though it should bleed down, let's be safe about this. A few pointers on the 03, 04 style. Check the O-ring that's on top of the pump, the one that's underneath this coupler tube. Make sure that the O-ring's good, which it is. Also, when you're going back together, make sure all your bolt holes are cleared out so you get the proper torque. The yellow O-ring goes down here and the black one's going to go up here. I've seen it reversed and the yellow O-ring up here burns out. So make sure you get them in the right order. Also, I strongly recommend doing the tube here. And to get it out, we'll take the tool here, slide it behind the black piece there, and pull it off. Because these are known for the O-rings failing inside of here. So I would replace this too if you don't want to do it twice.
What to do helped out a little bit here, and hopefully my explanation. I didn't really want to oversimplify it because it really is actually that simple. When you just look at it as a whole, what's going on, and once you understand what's going on, you won't ever let any of these stump you again. A few things I do want to say is that if you have a leak at an injector, you'll never have a misfire caused from a leak. I'll get some guys telling me, oh, I had an injector that was causing a misfire because of the leak at the seals. That's like having a balloon that has a hole that's only partially blown up. If you have a leak here, you have a pressure drop, and you won't have a misfire at this injector. You have a no start, or you have other issues, but it won't cause this injector to miss. It'll cause the whole entire system not to have enough oil pressure and not run. But again, hopefully covering the pumps, the different tools, what the sensors are doing, what the PCM is looking for, and looking at the FICM as just the same as the distributor, what's going on there, helps you to understand what's going on with the system. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.